Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I never thought my own mother would betray me, but there I was, sitting in a courtroom, watching it happen in real time. When my ex-wife and I divorced, I knew the custody battle would be rough. Divorces with kids always are. What I didn't expect was for my mom, my own flesh and blood, to take my ex-wife's side. The day started like every other court hearing, tense, nerve-wracking, and emotionally draining. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering evidence, and consulting with my lawyer to prove that I was a fit father. I wanted joint custody, nothing unreasonable, just a fair arrangement so I could still be an active part of my kids' lives. But then, my mom walked into the courtroom. I was confused at first, thinking maybe she was there to support me. That hope crumbled when she took the witness stand and answered the lawyer's questions without looking at me even once. Her testimony was like a knife to the heart. She painted me as irresponsible, distracted, and incapable of taking care of my kids. "He means well," she said, her voice measured, "but he's just not cut out for full-time parenting. The kids need stability, and their mother can provide that better than he can." I sat there, stunned, as she continued to describe events that either never happened or were blown out of proportion. She brought up an argument I had with my ex-wife years ago, twisted in a way that made me sound volatile. She mentioned times I had to work late, implying I prioritized my job over my kids. The worst part? She didn't look at me once. Not when she walked up to the stand, not while she was speaking, and not when she stepped down. It was like I didn't exist to her. When the judge awarded full custody to my ex-wife, I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. It wasn't just losing the custody battle. It was knowing that my mom's testimony had tipped the scales. She didn't just take my kids away. She took my trust, my hope, and my belief that she was in my corner. I tried to process it as the weeks turned into months. The house felt emptier without my kids' laughter, and every time I walked past their bedrooms, my heart ached. I could still see them during scheduled visits, but it wasn't the same. The bond we had started to feel distant, like a fraying thread I couldn't hold on to. My mom tried to reach out a few times after the hearing, leaving voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. What could she possibly say to justify what she'd done? I wasn't ready to hear it, and I wasn't sure if I ever would be. Life moved on, but the pain of that betrayal lingered. My ex-wife made seeing the kids as difficult as possible, despite the court's visitation schedule. I could tell they missed me, but they were caught in the middle, torn between a mother who was overwhelmed and a father who had been sidelined. The situation came to a head a year later, on a rainy Thursday night. I was dozing on the couch when I heard frantic knocking at the door. Opening it, I saw my two kids standing there, drenched and clutching backpacks. "We couldn't stay anymore," my son said, his voice trembling. "Can we live with you, Dad?" In that moment, I felt a mixture of relief, sadness, and anger. Relief that they had come to me, sadness at the situation that drove them to my doorstep, and anger at the people who had put us all in this position. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where the woman who had helped take them away would come begging to see them again. After the custody hearing, the silence in my house was deafening. The court's decision had left me hollowed out, my kids' absence like a wound I couldn't heal. It wasn't just the loss of time with them that stung. It was the knowledge that my own mother had helped make it happen. I replayed the hearing over and over in my head, trying to understand her motives. She had always loved my kids, doting on them every chance she got. So why testify against me? Why take my ex-wife's side when she knew how much I adored my children? The betrayal ran deeper than I ever thought possible. My days blurred together in the months that followed. I threw myself into work to avoid coming home to the empty bedrooms that once belonged to my kids. My ex-wife, who had been granted full custody, made visitation a nightmare. Every time I tried to schedule time with my kids, she found an excuse to cancel or postpone. When I did get to see them, I could tell something was wrong. They weren't the carefree, happy children I remembered. My son, who used to chatter endlessly about his favorite games, barely spoke. My daughter, who had always been glued to my side during visits, seemed distracted and withdrawn. "Are you okay?" I asked one day during a rare visit. My son shrugged, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mom's always busy," he mumbled. "We're with a sitter most of the time." That one sentence shattered me. I had lost custody because the court believed my ex-wife could provide a more stable environment, but stability didn't mean leaving my kids with strangers. I wanted to fight for them, to prove that I could give them the love and attention they deserved, but the system was stacked against me. Meanwhile, my mom acted like nothing had happened. She called me occasionally, leaving voicemails that started with casual lines like, "Hi, honey, just checking in." Her tone was cheerful, as if we were still on good terms. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Every time my phone buzzed with her name, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. How could she pretend everything was fine after what she had done? She had chosen my ex-wife's side, and by doing so, she had chosen to alienate me. The worst part was that she never apologized or tried to explain herself. In her mind, I was supposed to accept her decision and move on. But how could I move on when every reminder of her betrayal reopened the wound? One day, after months of silence on my end, she sent me a text. "We should talk. I miss you." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the screen. But instead of responding, I locked my phone and tossed it on the couch. Talking to her wouldn't change what had happened. As the months dragged on, I felt more isolated than ever. My ex-wife held all the cards when it came to the kids, and my mom's absence left a gaping hole in my support system. I leaned on a few close friends, but even they didn't fully understand the depth of my pain. "She's your mom," one friend said during a late-night conversation. "Maybe you should hear her out." I shook my head, my jaw tightening. She didn't just betray me. She betrayed my kids. I can't forgive that. It felt like a battle I was fighting alone, with no allies and no end in sight. My kids needed me, but the system, and the people I thought I could count on, had let me down. But even in the darkest moments, I held on to a sliver of hope. I knew my kids loved me, and I knew they missed me just as much as I missed them. I couldn't predict how or when, but deep down, I believed there would be a day when we could be together again. At first, I tried to convince myself that the custody arrangement would work out. Maybe my ex-wife could handle the full-time parenting load. Maybe the court's decision wasn't as disastrous as it felt. But it didn't take long for the cracks in her perfect facade to show. It started with small things. Mutual friends would casually mention that my kids were often late to school, or that they'd seen my ex-wife looking frazzled at the grocery store. Then came the whispers that hit closer to home. "She's not handling things well," one friend confided over coffee. "I don't want to get in the middle of things, but it's obvious the kids miss you. They talk about you all the time." Those words ignited a mix of emotions: hope, frustration, and anger. I had fought so hard to stay in their lives, only to be pushed aside. And now, when it was clear they needed me, I was powerless to do anything about it. During one of my rare visitation days, I finally got the chance to talk to my kids about how they were feeling. From the moment they arrived, it was clear something was off. My daughter, who used to run into my arms the moment she saw me, hesitated at the door. My son, usually brimming with energy, seemed subdued. "Are you okay?" I asked gently as we sat down for lunch. My daughter shrugged, her eyes on her plate. "Mom's always stressed," she said after a long pause. "She's busy all the time, and we have to stay with the sitter a lot." I exchanged a glance with my son, who nodded in agreement. "Yeah," he added quietly. "It's not like how it was when we were all together." Hearing that broke my heart. I knew things wouldn't be easy for them after the divorce, but I had hoped their mother would provide the stability the court believed I couldn't. Instead, it seemed like they were slipping through the cracks of her chaotic life. After they left that day, I couldn't stop thinking about what they had said. Every detail of their unhappiness gnawed at me, fueling my anger, not just at my ex-wife, but at the entire situation. I thought back to the custody hearing and the way my mother had testified in support of my ex-wife. At the time, she had spoken so confidently about what was best for the kids, as if she were an expert on the subject. Now, with my kids clearly struggling, where was her voice? My mom, who had been so eager to side with my ex-wife in court, was suddenly silent about the mess unfolding before us. She didn't call to ask how the kids were doing, didn't offer to help, didn't even acknowledge the situation. Every time I thought about her betrayal, my anger grew. It wasn't just the pain of losing custody. It was the knowledge that she had contributed to my kids' unhappiness. And yet, she acted like none of it was her responsibility. Over the next few weeks, the whispers about my ex-wife's struggles grew louder. I heard from another friend that my daughter had been crying at school, and my son had been acting out in class. The school even reached out to me directly, asking if there was anything I could do to help. "I'm trying," I told them. "But my hands are tied." The frustration of being on the sidelines was almost unbearable. I wanted to be there for my kids, to give them the love and support they so clearly needed, but the custody arrangement left me powerless. One evening, as I sat in my empty living room, I scrolled through old photos of my kids on my phone. Their smiling faces stared back at me, a painful reminder of the happiness we had once shared. I couldn't help but wonder how things might have been different if the court had ruled in my favor, or if my own mother hadn't turned against me. The days blurred together as I struggled to find a way to help my kids from afar. I called them as often as I could, offering words of encouragement and reminding them how much I loved them. But it wasn't enough. They're just words, I thought bitterly after one phone call. They need more than that. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself that I would find a way to make things right. My kids deserved better than the chaos they were living in, and I wasn't going to let them slip through the cracks. Little did I know, the turning point was closer than I thought. The next time I saw my kids, they would change everything with just a few words. "Dad, can we live with you?" It was a rainy, restless night when everything shifted. I had fallen asleep on the couch, the TV flickering softly in the background. My dreams were scattered and uneasy, a reflection of the turmoil that had been building over the past year. When I was jolted awake by a sharp knock at the door, I assumed it was nothing more than my imagination. But then the knock came again, louder this time. I sat up, groggy and disoriented, glancing at the clock. It was past midnight. My first thought was that it might be a neighbor, but something in my gut told me this was different. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. My heart stopped when I saw two small figures standing in the rain, clutching backpacks. I yanked the door open, and there they were, my kids, shivering, soaked to the bone, and looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. "Dad," my son said, his voice trembling as he looked up at me. "We couldn't stay anymore. Can we live with you?" The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. I ushered them inside, grabbing towels and blankets to wrap around their drenched bodies. As they sat on the couch, I noticed how tired and scared they looked. My daughter clung to her brother, her eyes red from crying. "What happened?" I asked gently, kneeling in front of them. "Why are you here?" My son hesitated, glancing at his sister before answering. "Mom's never home. She leaves us with sitters all the time, and sometimes we don't even know where she is." My daughter nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We tried to tell her we didn't like it, but she wouldn't listen. She's always yelling or saying she's too busy." My heart ached as I listened to them pour out their frustrations. They felt neglected, ignored, and unwanted in their own home. Every word they spoke chipped away at the anger I had been carrying for so long, replacing it with a fierce determination to protect them. That night, I made them hot chocolate and tucked them into bed, reassuring them that they were safe. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to," I said softly, brushing the hair from my daughter's forehead. "We'll figure this out together." "Promise?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise," I said, my throat tightening. When they finally fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, trying to process everything. My kids had run away from their mother's house, seeking refuge with me, a father who had been labeled unfit by the court. The irony wasn't lost on me, but there was no time for bitterness. My priority was making sure they felt safe and loved. The next morning, I called their school to let them know what had happened. The principal was supportive, though she mentioned that the kids' attendance had been erratic in recent months. It was another painful confirmation of what I already knew. Their mother wasn't providing the stability the court had assumed she could. When my ex-wife found out they were with me, the fallout was immediate. She called, her voice laced with anger and desperation. "You have no right to keep them," she said. "They came to me," I replied calmly. "They're safe here, and they want to stay." Her tone shifted, becoming defensive. "This isn't about what they want. You're trying to make me look bad." "This isn't about you," I said firmly. "It's about them. And right now, they need stability. If you want to involve the court, go ahead. But I think we both know how that will turn out." She didn't respond, and the line went dead. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. Over the next few days, my kids began to settle in. It wasn't an easy transition. They were still processing the emotions of leaving their mother's house, but there was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. My son started smiling more, and my daughter became her talkative self again. One night, as we sat around the dinner table, my son looked up at me and said, "It feels good to be home." His words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had felt powerless to protect them, but now, they were here, and we were finally a family again. Having my kids back was a dream come true, but it wasn't without its challenges. Overnight, my life shifted from being a single guy living alone to a full-time parent juggling work, school schedules, extracurriculars, and everything in between. The quiet, empty house that had haunted me for a year was now filled with laughter, sibling arguments, and the endless chaos that comes with raising two children. The first week was a blur of adjustments. I had to rework my daily routine, coordinate with their school, and figure out meals that didn't just come from a takeout menu. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Every time I tucked them into bed, their presence reminded me of what I had fought so hard to regain. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The emotional toll of the past year weighed heavily on the kids. My son had trouble sleeping, waking up from nightmares about being left behind. My daughter clung to me more than ever, afraid I might disappear like she felt her mother had. Rebuilding their trust and sense of stability became my top priority. It didn't take long for my ex-wife to find out they were living with me. When she called, her anger practically radiated through the phone. "You can't just take them," she yelled. "I didn't take them," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "They came to me because they felt unsafe with you. You're turning them against me," she accused, her voice shaking. "This is manipulation, plain and simple." "No, this is parenting," I shot back. "They're here because they need a stable home, and right now, you're not providing that. If you want to involve the court again, feel free. But I think we both know how that would go." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she finally hung up. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The confrontation was over for now, but it left a bitter taste in my mouth. She was their mother, and despite everything, I wanted her to be better for their sake. As if dealing with my ex-wife wasn't enough, my mom started calling more frequently. At first, I ignored her, letting her calls go to voicemail. I couldn't bring myself to talk to her, not after what she had done in court, but she was persistent. One day, after I ignored her latest call, she showed up at my house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking frail and nervous. "I just want to see the kids," she said, her voice shaky. "Please, let me see them." Her request caught me off guard. For a moment, I considered slamming the door in her face, the memory of her courtroom betrayal still fresh in my mind. But then I thought about my kids. They loved their grandmother, and they didn't understand the complexities of what had happened. "Come in," I said reluctantly, stepping aside. The kids were thrilled to see her. My daughter ran into her arms, chattering excitedly about school and her new friends. My son, though more reserved, smiled as she pulled him into a hug. Watching their joy softened some of the anger I felt, but it didn't erase it. After they went to bed, my mom and I sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "For what?" I asked, my voice sharp. "For helping my ex-wife take them away? For testifying against me? For pretending everything was fine while I struggled to pick up the pieces?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said. "She came to me, begging for help. She said she couldn't do it alone, and I believed her. I didn't think." "You didn't think to ask me?" I interrupted. "To talk to me before taking her side?" She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I see that now. I should have supported you, but I let her manipulate me. I'll never forgive myself for that." Her apology didn't erase the pain, but it was a start. I told her she could see the kids, but only on my terms. "If you ever go behind my back again, that's it," I warned her. "No second chances." "I understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to make things right. For the kids' sake, I decided to give her a chance. They deserve to have their grandmother in their lives, even if my relationship with her was fractured. But forgiving her was another matter. Every time I saw her, I couldn't help but think about the damage her actions had caused. Rebuilding trust would take time, if it was even possible at all. As the days turned into weeks, a new normal began to take shape. The kids adjusted to life with me, their smiles coming more easily and their laughter filling the house once again. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Little did I know, the hardest conversations were still ahead, not just with my mom, but with my ex-wife, who wasn't ready to let go without a fight. Letting my mom into the house that day was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. The kids were thrilled to see her, their faces lighting up as they hugged her tightly. For their sake, I smiled and kept things cordial, but beneath the surface, anger and betrayal churned like a storm. After dinner, as the kids settled into bed, the tension in the air grew heavier. I stood in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes, while my mom lingered at the table. It felt like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, I set down the towel and faced her. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "Why did you help her take them away from me?" She flinched, her eyes welling up with tears as she looked down at her hands. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said quietly. "Your ex came to me, crying, saying she couldn't do it without help. She told me she was afraid you couldn't handle raising the kids alone. And you believed her? I said, my voice rising. You didn't even talk to me. You just took her side and went to court to tear my family apart. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. I thought I was helping, she whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought the kids would be better off with her. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. You thought they'd be better off with her? Have you seen how they were living? They came to me, Mom. They ran away because she was neglecting them. Is that what you call better off? I didn't know, she said, her voice breaking. She made it seem like she had everything under control. She said you were working too much, that you'd never have time for them. Did you ever think to ask me? I demanded, my anger spilling over. To come to me and find out what was really going on before you testified against me in court? Her silence was deafening. She stared at the table, her tears falling freely now. I was wrong, she admitted after a long pause. I see that now, but at the time, I thought I was protecting the kids. I just wanted to help. You didn't help, I said, my voice sharp. You made everything worse, for me and for them. Do you have any idea how much damage you caused? She nodded, wiping her eyes. I've thought about it every day since that hearing, she said. I hate myself for what I did. I don't know how to fix it. Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw the guilt etched into her face, the weight of her regret pressing down on her shoulders. Part of me wanted to lash out, to make her feel the pain she had caused me. But another part of me, one I didn't want to admit existed, felt a pang of sympathy. I don't know if you can fix it, I said honestly. It's not something that can be undone. But if you want to make things right, start by being there for the kids. They love you, and they don't deserve to lose you because of what you did to me. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes to make it up to you and them. I promise. As she left that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Her apology didn't erase the pain, but it was a step in the right direction. The road to forgiveness wouldn't be easy, and I wasn't sure if I could ever fully trust her again. But for the sake of my kids, I was willing to try. In the days that followed, my mom started showing up more frequently. She offered to help with school drop-offs, attended soccer games, and even cooked dinner a few times. The kids were thrilled to have her around, and I could see how much it meant to them. As much as I hated to admit it, her presence made a difference. Slowly, the cracks in our relationship began to mend. Not completely, but enough to create a tentative truce. But one question still lingered in the back of my mind. Was she truly sorry, or was she just trying to ease her own guilt? Only time would tell. And with my ex-wife still lurking in the background, I knew the hardest battles were yet to come. My mom's apology, as heartfelt as it was, couldn't undo the damage she had caused. It didn't erase the betrayal I felt, or the pain of losing so much time with my kids because of her actions. But for the sake of my children, I decided to give her a second chance. I made it clear from the start that this wasn't a free pass. You can see the kids, I told her one evening after the kids had gone to bed. But it's going to be on my terms. No more going behind my back, no more playing sides. If you ever try something like that again, it's over. No second chances. She nodded solemnly, her face etched with regret. I understand, she said quietly. I just want to make things right. Her promise sounded sincere, but the sting of her courtroom betrayal still lingered in the back of my mind. I wanted to believe she had learned from her mistakes, but trust wasn't something I could offer freely, not anymore. For a while, things were tense but manageable. My mom started showing up more regularly, helping out with the kids in small but meaningful ways. She offered to drive them to school when I was running late, attended their soccer games, and even joined us for dinner on occasion. The kids were thrilled to have her back in their lives. My daughter would light up whenever my mom walked through the door, launching into excited stories about her day at school. My son, though quieter, seemed comforted by her presence. Seeing their happiness was a bittersweet reminder of the relationship I had once cherished with my mom. She had been an incredible grandmother before everything fell apart, and it was clear how much the kids loved her. But every time I saw her playing with them or offering them advice, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Does she really understand what she did?" The boundaries I had set seemed to hold, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily, especially when the betrayal involved my kids. I couldn't forget the moment in court when she had taken my ex-wife's side, or the months of silence afterward when I had needed her support the most. I tried to focus on the present, reminding myself that she was making an effort. But even as I watched her laughing with the kids or helping them with homework, the past felt like a shadow looming over us. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, I decided to address the lingering tension. Do you really understand what you did? I asked, my tone calm but firm. She paused, her hands stilling over the sink. I think about it every day, she said. I know I hurt you, and I know I let you down. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want you to know I'm trying. Her words were honest, but they didn't erase the doubt in my heart. Trying isn't enough, I said. This isn't something you can just fix with good intentions. It's going to take time, and even then, I don't know if we'll ever get back to where we were. She nodded, her expression somber. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship settled into a cautious rhythm. She became a consistent presence in the kids' lives, but I kept my guard up. Every interaction felt like a test, a chance for her to prove that she had changed. The kids, blissfully unaware of the tension between us, continued to thrive. My daughter's confidence returned, and my son started to open up more. Their happiness was a reminder of why I had decided to let my mom back in, even if it meant swallowing some of my pride. But forgiveness still felt like a distant goal. I wanted to believe she was genuine in her efforts, but a part of me couldn't help wondering, was she doing this for the kids, or was it just a way to ease her own guilt? One evening, as we sat watching the kids play in the backyard, my mom turned to me and said, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to thank you for giving me this chance. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the kids. You're lucky I'm doing this for them, I said honestly. Because if it were just about me, I don't think I could. She didn't respond, but her silence spoke volumes. For now, the boundaries were holding, and the kids were happy. That was enough to keep me going. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be long and complicated, and forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't be easy. As my mom gradually re-established her relationship with the kids, my ex-wife's behavior grew increasingly erratic. It started with sporadic phone calls, usually late at night, where her tone swung wildly between anger and desperation. You can't just keep them from me, she yelled during one call. I'm not keeping them from you, I replied, my voice steady. They came to me because they needed stability. You should be asking yourself why they felt the need to leave. She refused to acknowledge her part in the situation, instead accusing me of manipulating the kids. You've turned them against me, she said bitterly. No, I said firmly. They're old enough to make their own decisions. If you want to fix this, maybe you should focus on being there for them instead of blaming everyone else. Her silence on the other end of the line told me she wasn't ready to hear that truth. The phone calls escalated over the following weeks, each one more heated than the last. She alternated between demanding that I return the kids and accusing me of orchestrating some grand scheme to make her look bad. One day, she took things a step further by showing up at my house unannounced. The kids were in the backyard, playing with my mom, when I heard the sharp knock at the door. Opening it, I found my ex-wife standing on the porch, her face flushed with anger. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into the living room. I closed the door, taking a deep breath to steady myself. What's this about? I asked, keeping my voice calm. You're trying to make me the bad guy, she snapped. You've turned my own kids against me. No, I replied, crossing my arms. You did that all on your own. My words seemed to hit her like a slap. For a moment, her anger faltered, replaced by something that looked like guilt. But it didn't last long. They're my kids, she said, her voice shaking. I have a right to see them, and you can, I said evenly. But it has to be on their terms. They need stability right now, and you've shown them you can't provide that. She started pacing, her frustration boiling over. I was doing the best I could. Were you? I asked, my tone sharp. Because leaving them with sitters for days at a time doesn't sound like your best. Yelling at them, ignoring them, that's not parenting. They deserve better, and you know it. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might finally acknowledge the truth. But instead, she shook her head, muttering under her breath. You don't understand how hard it is. I do understand, I said, my voice softer now. Parenting is hard. But that doesn't mean you get to check out and leave them to fend for themselves. They came to me because they felt abandoned. That's on you, not me. After a long, tense silence, she turned toward the door. You think you're so perfect, she said bitterly. But this isn't over. I followed her to the door, opening it for her. If you want to see them, you need to go through the proper channels, I said. This kind of drama isn't good for anyone, least of all the kids. She didn't respond, just stormed out to her car and drove away. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, frustration, and a lingering sadness. No matter how much I disliked her, she was still their mother. I wanted her to be better, not for my sake, but for theirs. But it was clear she wasn't ready to take responsibility for her actions, and until she did, I couldn't let her chaos disrupt the stability I was building for the kids. In the weeks that followed, her absence was palpable. The late-night calls stopped, and she didn't show up at the house again. The kids noticed her silence, but they didn't seem surprised. "She's always like this," my daughter said one evening as we sat on the couch. "She gets mad, then disappears for a while." Hearing that broke my heart. No child should feel that way about their parent. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I said, wrapping my arm around her. She nodded, leaning into me. "I know. Thanks, Dad." As the chaos settled, I focused on continuing to rebuild our lives. My mom, to her credit, remained consistent, showing up when she said she would and helping out in small but meaningful ways. The kids were thriving, their laughter and energy returning little by little. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that my ex-wife's absence wouldn't last forever. There was still unfinished business between us, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she resurfaced. For now, though, I was content to enjoy the peace. My kids were happy, and that was all that mattered. With my ex-wife out of the picture, the house finally felt calm, like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in years, I could focus entirely on the kids without the constant interference of late-night calls or surprise visits filled with accusations. But as one storm cleared, another lingered in the distance. My strained relationship with my mom. The kids were thriving. My son's laughter returned, filling the house with a joy I hadn't heard in so long. My daughter's confidence blossomed, and her bubbly personality shone again. Seeing them happy was a balm for my soul, but every time I watched them with my mom, a knot of unresolved emotions tightened in my chest. She had been doing everything right, showing up when she said she would, helping with homework, attending their school events, but the past wasn't so easily forgotten. Every time I saw her smile at them or heard her offer words of encouragement, a small voice whispered, "She helped take them away from you." One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, my mom stayed a little longer than usual. We were sitting in the living room, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. I could feel her watching me, waiting for the right moment to say something. "I just want to make things right," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. I looked at her, unsure how to respond. "It's not that simple," I said. "You can't just undo what happened." "I know," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I want to earn your trust again. I'll do whatever it takes." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. For the first time, I saw just how much guilt she was carrying. It didn't erase the pain, but it made me pause. Over the next few weeks, I watched her actions more closely. She continued to show up consistently, going out of her way to support the kids and lighten my load. When my son had a school project that required late-night crafting, she stayed up with him, patiently gluing pieces together until it was perfect. When my daughter struggled with math homework, my mom sat beside her, gently guiding her through each problem. The kids were thriving with her in their lives, and I couldn't deny the positive impact she was having. But the process of letting her back in wasn't easy. Forgiveness felt like a mountain I wasn't ready to climb yet, even as she chipped away at my walls with every kind gesture and heartfelt apology. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, she turned to me and said, "I know it's going to take time. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm not going anywhere." Her words softened something in me. "I see that," I said quietly, "and I appreciate it. But I'm still not there yet." "That's okay," she said, smiling sadly. "I'll wait." As much as I wanted to keep my guard up, her persistence was hard to ignore. Slowly, I began to let her back in, though not without hesitation. The conversations between us grew less strained, and I found myself sharing small details about the kids' progress at school or funny things they had said. One afternoon, while watching the kids play in the yard, she turned to me and said, "They're doing so well. You've done an incredible job with them." Her words caught me off guard. "I couldn't have done it without them," I said. "They're stronger than I ever gave them credit for." "And so are you," she added, her voice full of admiration. For the first time, her praise didn't feel hollow. As my mom worked to rebuild our relationship, I noticed how much happier the kids were. My daughter no longer hesitated to call her grandma, and my son sought her advice on everything from sports to school. Their bond with her had remained intact despite everything, and seeing that gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to something resembling normalcy. But normalcy didn't mean forgetting. The memories of that courtroom and the months of silence afterward were still vivid in my mind. Forgiveness would take time, if it ever came at all. For now, though, I was willing to take it one step at a time. The kids were happy, my mom was trying, and the chaos that had once consumed our lives had finally given way to something quieter, something better. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally healing. In the end, the chaos of the past few years brought something I hadn't expected: clarity. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and moments where I felt like I was barely holding it together. But through it all, the most important thing stayed constant: my love for my kids. That love had carried us through the darkest times, and now, it was the foundation of the life we were building together. My mom's betrayal had cut deep. There were days when I wondered if I'd ever be able to truly forgive her. But her willingness to take accountability, to show up consistently for the kids, and to own her mistakes made it possible to start rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of tension, and trust wasn't something that could be repaired overnight. But the effort she was putting in showed me that she genuinely wanted to make things right. "I'm proud of you," she said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard. "For what?" I asked, glancing at her skeptically. "For never giving up," she said simply. "On them. On yourself. On us." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that we might actually get through this, together. With my mom making strides to rebuild our relationship, the absence of my ex-wife provided the kids with the stability they desperately needed. Without the constant drama and tension, they began to flourish in ways I hadn't seen in years. My son, who had once been so quiet and reserved, started opening up more, sharing his dreams of becoming a soccer coach and telling me about the friends he was making at school. My daughter's confidence grew, and she threw herself into her art, filling the house with colorful drawings that reflected her bright personality. "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" my daughter asked one night as I tucked her into bed. "I don't know," I admitted. "But what I do know is that no matter what happens, you'll always have me. And I'll always fight for you." Her eyes softened, and she hugged me tightly. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. Those small moments of connection reminded me why I had fought so hard to bring them home. They were my everything, and knowing they felt safe and loved made every challenge worth it. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this? Family isn't about perfection. It's not about who's right or wrong, or who made the fewest mistakes. It's about showing up, owning those mistakes, and choosing to do better every single day. My mom and I still have a long way to go. There are days when the memories of the courtroom resurface, and the sting of her betrayal feels fresh again. But when I see her laughing with the kids or helping them with their homework, I know she's trying. And for their sake, I'm willing to keep trying too. As for my ex-wife, her absence still looms over us, but it no longer defines our lives. If she ever chooses to take responsibility for her actions and genuinely work to be part of the kids' lives again, I'll welcome that. But until then, I'm focused on providing them with the stability and love they deserve. These days, our house is filled with warmth and laughter. It's not perfect, no family is, but it's ours and it's enough. My kids know they're loved, and that's all I could ever ask for. Looking back, I never would have guessed that such a painful chapter of my life could lead to something so meaningful. But here we are, moving forward one step at a time, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're finally where we're supposed to be.